What's up, coolers, and welcome back to Barca Dream Team. And today we're going to be reacting to Chapter 2 of FC Barcelona, A New Era. We'll be discussing Messi's departure from the club, Koeman's sacking, Ansu's injury crisis, and Aguero's retirement. We hope you'll subscribe and hit that notification bell, and let's get started.
And remember, you can check out our previous video on Chapter 1 by clicking the card on the top right of your screen.
So the episode started with a clip of Messi in the dressing room. He's really fired up for the match, and he's motivating everyone else too, getting them pumped up and encouraging them to leave everything out on the pitch. And that's something that most Barca fans have overlooked. Because of Messi's shy nature and humility, people just assume that he's not a leader, but he really was. Just because Messi doesn't make the whole team about himself, people assume he's not a leader. We've seen it recently with Argentina, but even when he was at Barca, he always used to give these kinds of speeches and halftime talks.
But then the episode moves on to Messi's departure from the club. And Jordi Alba was talking about how Messi was 100% committed to staying. It seemed almost certain that he'd stay, and Alba explained how he was in a state of shock for 3 days after finding out that his captain and close friend would be leaving after 21 years together. And that's something which a lot of fans probably haven't appreciated. All the players looked relatively calm on the day of Messi's departure, but Alba and Busquets explained that the whole squad was in disbelief because of what Messi means to Barcelona. We could even see the shock on Messi's face during his final address to Barca fans. He couldn't hold back the tears, and he took a moment but still couldn't get his words out. But after our captain left, all eyes were on Ronald Koeman to see who he'd bring in to try to patch up that giant Messi-shaped hole in the team. Koeman was adamant to bring in Memphis Depay from the start, and Eric Garcia and Sergio Agüero both joined from Manchester City in that same summer.
Let's face it, fans were heartbroken but still reasonably optimistic for the upcoming season. We even got to see a little conversation between Koeman and Pedri, with the Dutchman encouraging the teenager to stay grounded and humble because his second season would be more difficult than the first. And that was on the back of successful performances for Spain in the Euros and Olympics. Pedri was one of the young breakout stars of this Barcelona team. His importance to the team had only grown after Messi's departure. And the same could be said about Ansu Fati. Barca fans had pinned their hopes on him, hoping for him to carry on where he left off before his long-term injury. Ansu explained how difficult this was for his family and himself. He said the injury came at the worst time for him because he was achieving his dream by representing Barca's first team. But the injury brought all that good feeling to an absolute standstill.
And Ansu went on to explain in this episode how the injury made him more grateful. He felt that he was missing out on small things he'd previously taken for granted, like training. And we know how close the Barca squad have become. I can only imagine how hard it must have been to sit out on the sidelines, not being able to help the team. And with Ansu's return to action only a few weeks away, he told us that he'd asked the club for the number 17 shirt, but Barca needed to fill every squad number, so they asked him whether he would be able to carry the weight of the number 10 shirt left vacant by Lionel Messi. He then went to ask the captains, who agreed, and he expressed his pride to wear the number 10 shirt. In fact, on the way to the stadium, he was singing a Messi chant with his dad and brother, which really was quite funny to see.
And Ansu couldn't have dreamt of a better comeback. He scored within a few minutes of coming on as a substitute against Levante. And that produced one of the best images I can imagine in recent history, with Araujo lifting Ansu and the teenage sensation triumphantly raising a fist in the air. Ansu explained how surreal that moment was, and he appreciated the fact that his goal came at the packed Camp Nou, with the Barca faithful shouting his name. But even Ansu's return wasn't enough to save Koeman's job. Losses against Bayern, Atletico, Benfica and Real Madrid really did put a lot of pressure on the Dutch coach. Ironically, it was Luis Suarez who scored in that 2-0 loss against Atletico. He chose not to celebrate scoring against Barca, but he made a gesture towards our manager. He was referencing Koeman's call telling him to leave the club. And that shock 1-0 loss against Rayo Vallecano was the last nail in the coffin for Koeman's job. He was sacked the next day.
And it was then Barca B coach Sergi Barjuan who was trusted to come in as the interim coach until a replacement could be found for Koeman. He'd been promising taking over from the very successful Garcia Pimienta, who he had succeeded in the B team. But Barjuan's reign started off terribly. His debut match against Alaves was brought to a halt after Sergio Agüero collapsed to the floor, clutching at his chest. And I remember that moment. We were all aware of Agüero's injury record with City, but this felt different. He was lying there almost shocked himself. I think he'd realised that this was no minor problem. And 1 month later, Agüero took it upon himself to cut his Barca career short. He took the best decision considering his heart problem and retired. In fact, his farewell presentation was very similar to that of Lionel Messi's, with both Argentines struggling to get their words out. But Agüero did end saying he could leave with his head held high. He achieved a lot with Manchester City, and he had one El Clasico goal to his name as well. But thankfully, the away match against Celta Vigo started off a lot better. Ansu Fati got on the score sheet again with a fantastic finish, and he was really pulling the strings of Barca's attack alongside Jordi Alba on that left flank. But things quickly went sour. It was a lofted ball over the top from Alba, the intended target being Ansu, who was making a darting run forward. But suddenly he just pulls up and he's holding his left leg.
And at that point, you're just hoping that it's not his meniscus again. He'd been out injured for over a year because of that problem, and all Barcelona fans were hoping for the best. But it was actually his left hamstring, which he was slightly thankful for. However, that would still bring his good form to an end, with a few weeks out on the sidelines. And Ansu explained his frustration, almost tearing up on the pitch. Why me, he questioned as he was helped off the field. And with Barca, when it rains, it really does pour, because despite leading Celta Vigo 3-0 at half-time, an inspired second-half performance from the home side meant that they fired 2 past Ter Stegen. And in the 95th minute, it was Iago Aspas who scored the equaliser, sending Celta fans into a frenzy. But for Barca, this felt more like a loss than a draw. To throw away a 3-goal lead like that was just sickening. The players all collapsed to the floor at the full-time whistle in disbelief. And that was the last straw for Sergi Barjuan. Laporta immediately dials the number of Xavi Hernández, who was in Doha, Qatar. Xavi explained that Laporta called to ask him if he was willing to take up the job he'd rejected many months ago. Since then, Quique Setien, Ronald Koeman and Sergi Barjuan had all failed to make their mark on the team.
But that's where the episode ended, guys. Chapter 3 will pick up from that moment that Xavi receives the call. And make sure to look out for our reaction to that episode, which will come out very soon. But let us know your thoughts in the comments, guys. Tell us what you made of the documentary and which did you prefer, chapter 1 or 2. So if you like this video, guys, make sure to hit that notification bell, subscribe to BDT, and we'll see you next time. Visca el Barça!